And as I walked into the door, I wasn't there no more than a few minutes, and when my younger brother said, Ho Chi Minh is going to win the war, I took it personally. I got mad at him and I gave him a punch in the mouth. You know, it may have been difficult at the time, but I made the smart choices I had to make. You know, I worked when I had to work to support my wife and children. The war had its impact for me, emotional and psychological.
Service, Sacrifice, and Resilience. Guardians on the Front Lines is an oral history project exploring and preserving the stories, perspectives, and experiences of U.S. military veterans and first responders who called the Marianas home.
Hafide and Tiro, welcome to this episode of Service, Sacrifice, and Resilience, Guardians on the Front Lines. My name is Leo Pangilinan, and I'm joined here with our guest today, Milton John Falemalama Coleman Sr. Mr. Coleman is born and raised in Honolulu, Hawaii, and has lived here on Saipan, here in the Sinamai, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, for the past 30 years. He is a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces. He entered the U.S. Navy in October of 1968 and received an honorable discharge in November 18th, 1968. He is married to Tomasa Palacios Coleman, and together they have 3 children, 19 grandchildren, and 8 great-grandchildren. Mr. Coleman, welcome to our show. Sizus Maasi for talking story with me and sharing your experiences as a veteran of the military, but also as a longtime resident here in the Sinamai.
Thank you for inviting me.
Great. So I wanted to start by just asking you, how old were you when you first entered the service?
October 1966, I was 19 years old.
What were the circumstances at the time that led you to join the service?
I had a draft notice which prompted me to join the service of 1A.
Were there any other circumstances surrounding that?
My cousin had joined the Navy and he encouraged me to do the same as he did. So that's one of the reasons why I joined.
You were drafted, so you didn't really have a choice, but you ended up being in the U.S. Navy, which is where you wanted to be.
Yes.
Yes. What kinds of adjustments did you have to make upon entering military service?
Went to school in Norfolk, Virginia with the U.S. Naval School Command. I didn't adjust to an extent that much. I was just young enough, fit enough, ready to go for it.
Yeah.
Take a chance.
Was there some other factors in your background, family history or cultural values that helped prepare you for military service?
Yes, I had an uncle. My dad's oldest brother was in the U.S. Navy. And then my grandfather on my dad's side was in the U.S. Navy. He was a World War I veteran. The U.S. Navy. He retired as a Navy chief.
I remember you mentioned also offline that your grandmother had a hand in your decisions.
Yeah, my grandmother, she always told me when I was a young boy to join the Navy and see the world. It really kind of stuck with me before I joined the Navy.
Well, let's talk about your jobs in the Navy. What kind of jobs did you occupy?
To learn how to be a communication yeoman, which was a 6-week school. After completing the program, I received orders to the commander of the 7th Fleet in Western Pacific. And my job was communication yeoman, as I was trained to be.
Did you ship out immediately after completing the training, the 6-week training program?
I immediately got my orders, but I had about a 1 week. I flew to Hawaii to catch the flight there to my ship. And I came aboard the ship July 1967.
Where did you end up serving?
Well, I served for the CR division aboard ship. And then I served later on with the Naval Supply Center. But I was a communication yeoman seaman, and we worked in the communication center aboard ship, handling messages for the 7th Fleet staff. So we visited Singapore, for example, Hong Kong, Subic Bay, and Japan. We went to Sasebo, Niigata, and Otaru.
Were you involved in any major battles or campaigns?
Well, from what I can recollect, we were in about 6 battles, but the major one was the Battle of Hue City, which we fired gunfire support for the troops ashore.
This is in Vietnam.
It's in Vietnam, yes. Outside the city of Hue, along the coastline.
Yeah. How long were you offshore performing that role?
For the extent of the battle.
Now,
I think it was about during the Tet Offensive of 1968. So we were on call to fire support wherever needed, and we always answered the call.
what capabilities did the 7th Fleet have?
Well, aboard our ship, we had a helicopter, we had missiles, we had a 5-inch gun mount, a 6-inch gun mount, and we were the flagship for all the ships in the 7th Fleet, and we carried a 3-star admiral.
Were you involved in other conflicts?
Yes, we were involved in the Pueblo Incident, which was, I believe, February of '68. We were part of a task force that went up to the Sea of Japan to seek release of the ship, the Pueblo, the USS Pueblo.
Yeah, what do you recall about that incident?
I recall a highly tense state of war existed, and we went up to the Sea of Japan, and we were there, and it was a very tense situation between the units that were there. I mean, other countries besides the U.S. Navy. USS Enterprise was there, for example. But I don't know all the classified information. It wasn't available to me about the battle itself or the fight to get the Pueblo back.
Yeah. Well, between your stopovers at various ports, as well as what I imagine coming under fire and also returning fire at the port of the city of Hue in Vietnam, are there any memorable experiences during those conflicts for you that you might want to share?
Yes, we were called upon to rescue pilots that were flying missions over North Vietnam, and when they were flying back to the carrier, they had to ditch their plane. So our helicopter, I was aware of it, but I wasn't with that division. But they would rescue the pilots from the ocean. There were more to it than that, but one time we had to rescue a pilot that was shot down over China, and we had to go in. It was a very potentially war situation for us.
How would you say, looking back at that today, how might that have affected your trajectory in life or your outlook, your perspective?
Well, kind of kept it to myself that I served in Vietnam. I didn't speak about it to anybody because I felt we were hated, and it was true. We were hated. The war was hated. It was divided the American people, and there are a lot of protests in the U.S.
Was that sort of a common sentiment among folks you served with as well?
You know, the folks I served, the men I served with, and officers, they were very dedicated. They believed in what they were doing. There was no question about it. Well, we took a couple of hits along the coastline, but I don't remember witnessing any hits.
Mm-hmm.
But rockets hit other parts of the ship. And we fired our missiles, I believe, upon request.
Mm.
That's what I can remember.
Yeah. But your ship did get hit. It did
I
take off.
forgot how many died aboard the ship, but there were fatalities and casualties on the ship during the time I was aboard. I collected 9 months of combat pay because I was in combat with the unit. So, you know, it's not easy to talk about it now.
Yeah.
I mean, it is easy to talk about it now, but it wasn't easy to talk about it all those years because we had to face the media accounts. It was on, you know, the first war that was on television, and people saw what was happening in the war on television. They turned their stomachs against the war.
Did you personally experience, at least those who knew that you had served in the war, that have you had personal experiences where they sort of turned against you or espoused their...
Well, you know, I was a casualty of the war. When I was brought home to Honolulu by evacuation plane, I was up at Triplet and I was able to come home to my mom and my younger brothers that were there at home. And as I walked into the door, I wasn't there more than a few minutes, and when my younger brother said, Ho Chi Minh is going to win the war,
Mm-hmm.
I took it personally. I got mad at him and I, you know, took it out. I gave him a punch in the mouth because I said that was the wrong thing to say. But he later joined the army.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you guys smooth things over
Oh yeah.
after that?
We smoothed things over. I don't know if he was drinking at the time or not, but he did say Ho Chi Minh is going to win the war. And that was 1968, long before the war ended, which was 75.
I want to ask you some questions about the personal sacrifices you've had to make as a result of your service. Going back to the time you were in service, what kind of sacrifices do you feel you've had to make while in service?
Well, I don't know if I can really call it a sacrifice, but homesick,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and aware that a lot of killing was going on in the war. You had to bear with it, you know, something you couldn't do anything about, but live with it, you know, even though you weren't the one doing the killing, but there was bombing, you know, I used to see planes diving, and we called in fire support or units,
These are planes diving into the ocean after being shot down?
No, these are planes firing their missions in the beach areas. They dive down and strafe or shoot their missiles or rockets.
Were there some difficult choices you've had to make?
Well, it worked out all right for me. That's why I can't say it's difficult. You know, it may have been difficult at the time, but I made the smart choices I had to make. You know, I worked when I had to work to support my wife and children. You know, for example, I worked for the Saipan Stevedore Company, 55 cents an hour for a year. And that was sacrifice.
And this was several years after you returned home?
It was 71 to 72. Yeah. Because I got married in 69. I ended up getting hospitalized for war trauma and put under observation at the psychiatric ward in Guam Hospital, Guam Navy Hospital, and Guam Memorial Hospital. And I was found all right to be sent home, so they sent me home. I went back to Saipan, where my parents were, and my wife, and my daughter, Marie. So we were able to, I lived in the house in Capitol Hill for about a year. But then I worked, so it was okay. The war had its impact. You know, it had different impact with different people. For me, the impact was emotional and psychological. You know, it's like having bad dreams. You know, it was a nightmare for some reason. For some reason you got nightmares, but other guys didn't get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, for a little bit, the impact on your family. First, I wanna find out, you know, what were some of the benefits that accrued to your family as a result of your service?
Well, my dad, who was in Micronesia for 17 years, went back to American Samoa to run for governor in 1978, and it was very supportive of him because he had a son that served in Vietnam, and that was me. You know, I was the only serviceman whose father was a governor of a U.S. territory. I know there was another governor's son who was in the Navy, Governor Jimmy Carter of Georgia.
Jimmy Carter, who became president?
Who became president. His son was a Navy gunboat captain. But I feel at ease to talk about it now because I've kind of weathered it through.
But at the time, it was something you would not share.
No, I wouldn't because it's too rough, emotionally and psychologically.
Yeah. What about some of the challenges that you feel your family had to bear or overcome?
Well, my Marie and Junior, you know, they didn't understand that I was in the war. I don't know if it affected them or not, but it didn't bother them. But I think it was something to think about. You know, coming home was tough because you never felt you were at home until you got home and felt you were at home later on in the years.
So it took time to adjust.
Took time to adjust, took time to live with the experiences, and not get too carried away with PTSD or any other factor that affected a lot of soldiers and sailors.
I wanted to ask you to elaborate a little more about that. What would you, based on your personal experience and those other veterans that you've talked to, what would you like our community to know or understand about the sacrifices that you can expect to make in service?
Well, the military prepares you for a job. They won't send you to a job to do unless you're trained for it. But you train with a unit. How well you do is how well your unit does, each member in the unit. We were really a tight ship. I mean, we were close, we really believed we had a tough unit. As a matter of fact, they used to call us a fighting flagship. But, it's a rough thing to think about. When you think of, it's a deep feeling, but, it can really be traumatic.
How do you think people in the community who may not fully understand or aware of those experiences, how do you think they can come to appreciate and understand?
Well, I came back alive. That makes a difference to those who didn't come back alive, especially their families. The impact on their families, it's far-reaching effects. But the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. has all the names of the 58,000 who died in the war. So that's a tribute to their legacy and memory, and as well as the living Vietnam veterans.
Do you recommend the path you've taken to other people?
Well, the path hasn't been easy. I just, the big key to my achieving what I did was working it through by working. Keep working and keep working it through as you work. On the job. I had a job. My second year of marriage for my daughter, my wife was pregnant with our first child. I took a job working in surgery. I had 1 week of training in surgery at St. Francis Hospital in Honolulu. And the reason why I took that job was because we had no medical plan. We had to pay cash for the maternity costs, but delivery costs, in which we were able to pay for it. But there's a lot of trauma from working in surgery too. They brought not home, but they brought into the ward there some people who were injured from shots, emergency surgery. And I was only a housekeeper. I used to sterilize 8 operating rooms and do the bedding and all the other things you have to do with the surgery department. But I did all right. I was excellent at my job.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a strong work ethic. And I'm wondering if that also comes from the discipline and training and the kind of jobs you did while in service.
But a discipline is a key point. If you learn discipline and you know it well, it will be with you for the rest of your life. That's the way I see it. And people who get into trouble socially or economically, they lack the discipline to do the right thing.
Is that something you feel you've always had in you, even before service?
Yeah, well, I believe so.
Yeah. Is there anything you regret about service? Your life in service?
No, I don't. I wish I could have made a career out of it. But I was discharged on the basis of disability, physical disability. But I was able to get back into the Department of Defense, U.S. Navy, from 1985 to 1989 with a Naval Supply Center in Pearl Harbor. And I was proud to be in the Navy again, even though I was now a civilian instead of being in uniform. It's really hard to get jobs like that, in Honolulu especially, because there's a lot of qualified people.
Now, this was the U.S. Navy Supply Center at Pearl Harbor.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was a closed shop. It was classified. What goes on in our division stays in the division.
So I imagine you had to have special clearance to be
Definitely,
on the
yes.
job site. Yeah.
You had to have a clearance to just enter. And, I had to go through 6 security checkpoints
Wow.
to get to the duty station. And you don't remember your number for your card, you get locked out, especially at the night shift.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you would have wanted to make a career out of this, which would have probably looked like a lifetime in service. If you could go back and do things differently, what would you do?
Well, just reflecting on what I could have done or what I couldn't do, I just went with the flow. No matter how bad the job is or how poor the pay, I just stayed with it. But I always had the VA disability compensation, which I earned from the service. And that was able to keep the groceries on the table, so to speak, pay the rent.
But I understand you weren't wholly dependent on that because you took on a lifetime of different types of jobs.
Yeah, I had a career job in the federal civil service for 10 years, and then I was in the CNMI government service for 13 years.
What kind of jobs did you have in the CNMI government?
I was with the public auditor's office for 3 years. I was an auditor, and then I was in the PSS, the public school system, as a teacher for 8 years.
What schools did you teach at?
Marianas High School and Saipan Southern.
Thinking back, do you think the sacrifices you've made have been worth it?
Yeah, it won me self-respect. I had self-respect for what I did. I didn't depend on the respect from somebody else. I felt like what I did was respectable. And I felt good about that. I passed the Praxis 1 and Praxis 2 with a highly qualified teacher role I played at Saipan Southern High School. But I wasn't a core teacher. I was just a food court teacher. And I survived it.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt I wasn't given a good opportunity, because I taught business math at Marianas High School. I never got that job again. It was never offered to me again, but I did a good job as a business math teacher. But Saipan Southern, it was given to somebody else.
Mm. Despite having the background, you have a bachelor's degree in business administration.
Yes, I have a Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration.
Yeah.
I have an appreciation for the fact that I served. And I hope other servicemen can say the same thing for themselves. Maybe they aren't appreciative, they aren't proud of I was proud of the Navy unit I served with. I was proud of the Navy Supply Center I served with. So, that alone is self-fulfilling, for your own self-respect, self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
And you have high esteem for what you've done. A lot of people don't have high esteem for what they've done in their life. I have high esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Because I knew it was tough to be in the federal service in Honolulu, Hawaii. And I knew it was tough to be at the scene of my service. And, I was challenged many times, but I took it lightly. I didn't get aggressive about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the director of the Vet Center in Honolulu, Steve Moner, who was a Vietnam veteran himself, told me that after 1975 up to 1985, there were about 30,000 Vietnam vets that committed suicide.
Oh, wow.
Nationwide. Because of that, U.S. Congress passed legislation to set up vet centers all around the country, help those guys out. That's a very shocking statistic, number, yeah.
But those clinics, did they roll out? Did they come to fruition in the 80s?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any knowledge about a center or some type of unit set up on Guam to receive injured soldiers from Vietnam?
Just a VA that I knew of.
Yeah.
You had to take what they had to offer. You couldn't impose or force something on to help you unless it was there to, in offering.
I just thought I might ask because, there was some Peace Corps folks that were here during the Vietnam War who would have sort of their own R&R on Guam and see a huge influx of soldiers being flown in, injured soldiers from Vietnam into Guam.
Yeah. Well, it's to be in the shoes of a Vietnam veteran and be outside, you won't be able to visualize it or experience it unless you've been in Vietnam yourself to really know the feeling behind it.
Yeah.
Because that's really a difficult thing, especially with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
What were some of the terms used for that back then?
Combat stress, combat psychosis, combat fatigue.
Was there something routine at least in the U.S. Navy, that you experience upon exiting or being discharged that would sort of screen or assess for that?
Yes, I went before a physical evaluation board at Pearl Harbor, which consisted of 2 Army captains and a Navy commander who were officers in the medical field. They're medical officers. And they offered me, they didn't offer it, but they told me you got to take 10% disability. That was really low, I mean, considering the disability I had. But the VA later gave me 30%. And then when I had worked at St. Francis Hospital doing that surgery job, my parents had us come back to Saipan. And you know, the experience was so hyper for me, having worked in surgery for 6 months. And then to come to Saipan, it was like the impact of being back in the war zone again. So I was evacuated in an emergency out to Guam by my dad. And there were other soldiers and sailors and airmen who were brought into the ward at Naval Hospital. And they were worse off than I am. At least I was able to be released and sent back home.
Yeah, that's interesting, that experience you just shared about going from an intensive, high pressure, high demand job where lives were at stake to an environment that was on Saipan at the time, which I imagine was very slow and a much slower pace.
Well, there's another factor there that I didn't bring up, was the fact that the VA prescribed medication for veterans who they think needed it. And some of the medication was such bad side effects, it disabled you physically. I mean, you know, it made your fingers crooked and your legs nervous. Yeah. And you didn't know anything about those kinds of medications. You just had to take it and then get treated for it with a doctor.
Sounds like a lot of trial and error back then in terms of the dispensing medication for various conditions that veterans were
Now, this
coming
is
home.
controversial, but they used to have experiments on veterans with medications that were never released to the public. But they were used, the veterans were used as guinea pigs for these tests on medications and their effectiveness.
To your knowledge, were they tested while in service?
Not
or
in the service, while they're
after?
after the service, yeah. And some were in the service too, depending where they were stationed.
Okay, let's come back to some of the challenges that you faced in service, and maybe perhaps the challenges that you continue to push through. But thinking back during your service and facing difficult times or difficult decisions or situations, what would you say were some of those factors that motivated you to push through and overcome?
Well, I lucked out. I had a loving wife. You know, she didn't understand what I was going through, but I was going through a lot. But she was patient enough to stick it out. And our 2 kids, you know.
Were you able to stay in contact with her while you were in service?
No, I didn't meet her until after the service.
Oh, okay.
I had another girlfriend who wrote to me while I was in the war zone. When I came back to Honolulu, I was at home. She came over to visit me with her girlfriend. But then I got a call from another guy who said he's now engaged to be married to her. He says, please don't call her because she feels under pressure. For that reason, I dropped the whole affair.
Yeah.
I decided to head to Saipan because my parents told me to come back to Saipan and visit, which I did because I was going to Honolulu Community College at the time.
And your dad had a job here with the Trust Territory Government.
Yeah, well, he was in the Federal Executive Service, Department of the Interior.
What values or lessons from your upbringing prepared you to overcome challenges in your line of service?
Well, you knew if you got into bad behavior, you'd be punished. With that thought in mind, you didn't behave like that, you know. It was tough. Drinking age was 21, and a lot of veterans were saying, "A guy can die for his country. Why can't he drink?" Drinking age was 21, and you're 19. So they changed it to 21 after a while. Yeah, it was tough, but I took it lightly. I mean, it was seriously a tough thing, but I took it lightly.
Yeah.
I managed to play it cool.
Yeah, let's delve into that a little bit.
Yeah.
As part of the challenges that you described bring on stress, and I'm wondering how do you deal with that stress when it creeps up in you?
Yeah, well, just got to play it cool. What I do is I say prayers.
Mm-hmm.
I pray to God. If I think things are not good to think about, I pray to God. Just to change the thought or get a new, better thought than I'm having. Because the doctor told me in Honolulu that suicide is normal for people, just don't act on it. But he knew I wasn't suicidal, but there were a lot of others that were.
What about your colleagues, those that you worked with? Did you see them in a supportive role? Did they support or help in any way with stress or overcoming those challenges?
Yes, I found stevedore company.
Anywhere. Could be in service, could be in your work life after service.
Yeah, well, there was encouragement. And they kind of understood a little bit about it, what I was facing, so.
Did you get a lot of questions from them about?
No, you have to put up or shut up. If you talk too much, I mean, regardless of what the issue is, you talk too much and you're on the job, it doesn't help you. And they get you singled out as a guy with problems, you know. You got to keep those problems to yourself so you don't get kicked out for some reason. I was never kicked out of the service, but there are other servicemen that were kicked out. A lot of servicemen didn't do well because they stayed in the military. They did well because they stayed in the military. While veterans who got out of the military found it rough getting a job or surviving. I was able to get a job though. There's that hate factor. It comes into play. It may not be your hate, but it might be somebody else's hate. It's resentful. It's contemptuous.
And you took on a lot of jobs after service. Did that ever come up in like your interviews or with your supervisor? Did you get a sense that maybe there was some judgment there because of your background in service?
Actually, my service time helped me get a job. I had the equivalent of a Purple Heart. I don't know if I got the Purple Heart, But that meant 10 points to your score. If you take the clerk exam, you get 10 points added to your score. Then if you're at 10 points, you go to the top of the list if you have the high score.
This is the test you took to enter the federal service?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, they really scrutinize. I just had to play it out the way I thought it would be, you know. Main thing though is the wife and kids were all right. Maybe I wasn't all right, but I did the best I could under the circumstances.
Well, your kids turned out more than all right.
Yeah, well, I gave them encouragement, paternal support, you know, for the kids. We were there for our kids, physically and mentally.
You mentioned being assessed for having a disability after service, and through, it sounds like a series of assessments over the years, those determinations changed. How has coming out of service and being disabled, how has that sort of affected you?
Well, the thing about it was the disability was really from enemy fire. It was chemical exposure. I don't remember the names of the, I think it was sarin, flogium, and radioactivity. Those really affected you physically and mentally. It had to be controlled through medication. But
Were you told that you were exposed to that?
yeah, I was told when I took a blood test with Straub Clinic in Honolulu, the doctor told me, reading the results, that I was exposed to chemical warfare. I didn't challenge it. I mean, you know.
But at the time you were in service, when you were on the ship, there was no indication that you were exposed to any of that?
Well, there was a shipment that came in from a supply ship, came to our ship, and I was a volunteer to carry the shipment, you know, boxes. They weren't allowed, nobody was allowed to carry those shipments unless they volunteered. So I volunteered, I think it was 3 or 4 times. And I think it was Agent Orange. I don't think it was nuclear waste. It was Agent Orange.
But you weren't told, and you don't know for sure.
I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
But if it was sensitive, it must have been Agent Orange.
Yeah. Overall, how has your service experience changed you as a person?
You know, when I was younger and I had been in the service, it didn't matter to me that much. But as I got older, and because recognition given on Saipan to veterans, I felt like it was really something to be proud of. You know, at the Veterans Day and parades. We marched, the VFW marched 6 times in parades, and we even won 2nd place in the
Best float?
best float. Yeah, $1,000. You know, I really I was appreciated more for my service outside of Hawaii than I was in Hawaii.
Tell me a little bit more about your role and experiences with the VFW. I understand you're a lifetime member?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it was 1987, I joined 4951, post 4951 in Honolulu. Then when I came to Saipan, they opened up a post here, so I transferred to 3457, which is currently the post for Saipan VFW members.
What kind of activities were you involved in as a member?
I was a chaplain. I used to handle the Voice of Democracy. I was chairman for about 4 times. Voice of Democracy is a scholarship program nationally for young students who did well on the exam and had audio-visual reading of the paper in addition to the theme they wrote.
Was it a competitive application process for high school seniors?
It's for freshmen through seniors, high school.
Okay.
One of the girls that passed, she went over $650. And she was the, she had the best paper for Patriot's Pen.
That's the highest award you could receive for...
And the highest award goes nationally, but for Voice of Democracy, the highest award is $30,000 a year scholarship.
applied to any school you decide to go to?
National schools,
National schools.
including the Philippines, South Korea, and Taiwan.
Do you know if that program continues to this day?
Yes,
It
definitely.
does. What lessons from your service continue to guide you in your life today?
Respect for authority, respect for the church you belong to, and respect for physical fitness. How fit you are, you know, the best you can do.
Let's talk a little bit about your experiences transitioning to civilian life. I know you mentioned some of it in our conversation here today, but I wanted to know specifically if any of the training activities while you were in service helped prepare you to transition into those, into family life and or, civilian work life.
Yes, it did. Partially only, though. It wasn't fully the only criteria. It helped to be in the military. You know, the VA helped you with counseling, therapy, and medication therapy.
Did they help you with job placement?
Yeah, they helped me with job placement too. But, you took a job, but you had to, even though you didn't like it, you have to take it anyway. Because, you got kids to feed, bills to pay.
Yeah.
That's the reality of life.
Yeah.
You know, how you face your reality, how well you did a reality check, what you're up to, or what you're capable of doing. You know, otherwise, you get off course, do things differently that shouldn't be done.
What would you say you've gained through service that continues to enrich your life?
Veteran benefits definitely enriched my life.
Yeah.
We were able to make investments with it. We lost it one time, but we got it back again. Because the truth is, there is a truth about the chemical warfare in the war zone. You know, I used to see little white particles floating all around the ship outside, fire from the shore. I mean, just an example. And
Which wasn't normal sort of debris after a bomb.
because the thing with being exposed to chemical weapons is that you may not be affected immediately. It may not affect you until sometime later in life. Especially with Agent Orange, you may be exposed to it during 65 to 75, but you don't get affected by it until 1990 or 2000 or something like that. Because it's in your system, you know, it's a matter of manifesting itself into a problem.
And for you, having believed that and having some evidence there that you were exposed to chemical warfare, knowing that it can affect you years later, how has that been for you? I mean,
Well,
does it come and go, or is it sort of something that's constant?
the damage has been done by the exposure, but you have to cope with it. So you have to take medicine to cope with it. It doesn't cure the problem. Problem is there, but to help you cope on a day-to-day basis with life in general. You know, it's hard to say that it didn't kill you, but it definitely harmed you. And you get lifelong treatment for it with the VA. I lived in the Marshall Islands before, but I was never exposed to radioactivity in Marshall Islands. I think it was, I can't confirm it, but it was aboard the ship, the South China Sea. I once saw the B-52s drop their bomb load on North Vietnam. That was a sight to see. I mean, it was really awesome. But you could have been affected by whatever chemicals were affecting your ship, where your ship was at the time it happened. But it's water under the bridge now. What happened happened. So what? Life goes on.
Well, they're still very real.
Maybe you didn't get a medal for it, but you got credit for the military service, which gives you the benefits.
Let me ask you one last question. This is about thinking back when you joined the service, notwithstanding your outlook at the time, which was to have a career in the service. What kinds of goals did you have back then? Do you feel like you were able to realize over your lifetime?
Well, when I was in the service, or when I was out of the service, I felt the drive to serve, the drive of your heart, body, and soul to serve the military. And, that drive, that ambition stayed with you for the rest of your days. Because when you go through a boot camp, you train as a company. Everybody in the company does well together, or they don't do well at all. There's a straggler or somebody falling behind. They have to catch up. I was the best swimmer and the best track man in my company in boot camp in San Diego. I was only 5'9", 155 pounds. But I was fit back then.
Mm. How fit were you? How
Willing to take on the competition. I surfed 30-foot waves as a surfer.
30-foot waves?
Yeah. I
I
was in
bet you were out there all day.
I was in the Macau Surfing Championships in 1966 while I was in the Navy Reserve.
Wow. You were in the reserve before you became an active.
Yeah, I was in the reserve first, then sworn into the active duty Navy.
Surfing champion.
Yeah, well, I can hold my own.
Okay, well, Pop, is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, thanks for letting me share. I hope it doesn't stir up any beef or something, or fight. This guy came up to me one day when I was in a restaurant here, and he said, you have veteran benefits. They belong to my father, not you. Because he was in the service and you weren't in the service. And I was surprised he said that. I said, where do you get your information from?
He just assumed you didn't serve.
Yeah, he just assumed I didn't serve.
but somehow you got the benefits? That's odd.
Yeah, well,
I think that-
that's his logic.
Yeah.
That wasn't, that's his thinking. That was wrong.
Well, you've earned your stripes to be able to say whatever you want to say here today about your own personal experiences.
Yeah, well, I wasn't in it for the rank, to tell you the truth. I was in it for the service. And I didn't try to go up and be a high-ranking person. But I was offered a commission after I graduated from Chaminade College in the Coast Guard. But because of medical reasons, I didn't take it. To each his own, but you gotta help all the others too.
Well, thank you so much, Pop, for spending time with us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I hope there's nothing offensive I said, but
Like I said, you've earned it to be able to say what you want to say,
yeah,
share your experiences and your perspectives.
there you go.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining us. This has been an episode of Service, Sacrifice, and Resilience, Guardians on the Front Lines. With me is Mr. Milton John Falemalama Coleman Sr., a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces, U.S. Navy, discharged with the rank E3 Communication Yeoman Seaman. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you.
I'm Leo Pangilinan, and I'm with the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. Thank you for joining us.